For a century, the galaxy had believed humanity was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Once, humans had surged across hundreds of star systems, their colonies spreading with relentless ambition. Their fleets had fought wars that reshaped sectors. Their scientists had engineered technologies that rivaled the achievements of the most advanced empires. Humans were audacious, unpredictable, and astonishingly resilient. And then, in the span of a single generation, they vanished. The disappearance had been sudden, inexplicable. Entire fleets that had been the pride of Terran civilization simply failed to respond to subspace queries. Colonies went dark, one by one. Planetary communications fizzled and died, leaving only silence. Nothing suggested destruction. No invading force had been identified. No natural cataclysm explained their absence. Humanity had become a ghost, a species erased from the map of the galaxy without a trace. The galaxy, in turn, exhaled. The Hrak's dominion annexed entire sectors with ruthless precision, claiming resources and systems once guarded by Terran fleets. The Elari Republic accelerated its technological dominance, constructing weapons and warships capable of crushing any perceived rival. The Vorthan Imperium, proud and unchallenged, consolidated its territory, its emperors confident that the apex of power had shifted permanently to those willing to assert it. The galaxy's races, once cautious of humans' unpredictable genius, now felt unshackled. The absence of humanity had created a vacuum, a freedom that invited arrogance. For decades, that arrogance flourished. Diplomatic envoys spoke freely of human extinction. Military analysts wrote papers declaring Terran designs obsolete, and scholars treated humanity as a historical footnote. Yet not all were convinced. Deep space anomalies appeared at the fringes of charts, faint and irregular. Pulses of energy, subspace interference, unexplainable disruptions in faster-than-light communications. They seemed insignificant at first, dismissible as sensor glitches or natural cosmic phenomena. And yet they persisted. Every generation, the anomalies grew stronger, more distinct, and unmistakably artificial. The most advanced computational systems of the Hrak's, Elari, and Vortans failed to decipher them. Signals appeared in patterns that suggested intelligence, deliberate design, but no species in the galaxy recognized the signature. Scholars debated, officers worried, and yet the majority ignored the warnings. It was human arrogance at its quietest. The assumption that a species erased from existence could never return, that the galaxy was safe from their ingenuity forever. Princess Kailira's descendant, the latest scion of the Vorthan line, was one of the few who took notice. She sat alone in the observation chamber of the Obsidian Crown, a vessel of imposing size and legendary reputation. Her golden eyes swept the view of the void, unblinking, analyzing every anomaly flagged by the flagship sensors. Reports came in of faint subspace pulses, signals that bent the known laws of physics, weaving through star systems as if space itself were being rewritten by invisible hands. "They are gone," she whispered to herself, almost as if saying it aloud could convince her mind. "Humanity is gone. This cannot be them." The Vor command believed the same. Fleet commanders assured her that Terran fleets had been destroyed or scattered, that even a miraculous return was improbable. Yet Kailira could feel it in her bones. These anomalies were not random. They were deliberate. They carried intelligence and, most importantly, intent. Something was moving in the dark, and it was moving with purpose. For the first time in centuries, Kalira allowed herself to recall the old Terran legends, tales of human ingenuity and cunning that had been taught in Vorthan academies as warnings. Humans had survived impossible odds, defeated predators that no other species could confront, and turned fragility into power. They had been small, unarmored, and underestimated, yet their minds had reshaped conflicts in ways armies could never predict. She shivered as the first faint realization took hold. If humans had survived, if even a fragment of their species remained, then the galaxy's assumption of dominance was built on fragile illusions. Meanwhile, across other civilizations, similar stirrings of unease emerged. The Alari Republic's computational networks struggled with patterns they could not parse. Systems designed to predict fleet movement reported impossible velocities and trajectories. The Hax Dominion spies returned with fragmented data, descriptions of fleets appearing and disappearing in ways that defied both logic and known technology. Every empire experienced the same impossible phenomenon, yet none could act in time. The galaxy had grown complacent. Humanity's absence had allowed arrogance to thrive unchecked, and every empire had taken that freedom for granted. Entire fleets were stationed in predictable formations, planetary defenses had become static and formulaic, and war academies taught tactics optimized against known species rather than unknown threats. The galaxy believed that it had survived the Terran era without consequence, but it had merely survived ignorance. On the Obsidian Crown, Kalira continued to study the anomalies, tracing patterns through the void. The signals were not random. They followed paths across multiple star systems, forming grids and trajectories that suggested planning and coordination. It was as if the humans had been observing silently, measuring the galaxy, waiting for the perfect moment. Kalira's heart pounded. She understood, finally, the dangerous elegance of humanity. Even in absence, they had shaped the galaxy through legacy and legend, and now, perhaps, they were returning not as vulnerable colonies, but as something far greater, far more terrifying. Every fleet, every empire, every system that believed it was safe would soon discover a truth that would echo across space and time. Humans had returned. They were no longer bound by absence, by weakness, or by the underestimation of the galaxy. And when they returned, the universe itself would tremble. The Obsidian Crown's sensors flared again. A single blip appeared at the edge of subspace, a precise, calculated pulse, unmistakably artificial. Kalira's eyes widened. This was no probe, no random distortion. This was the harbinger of their arrival. "They are coming," she said softly, her voice carried across the empty observation deck. "Humanity is returning." And across the galaxy, for the first time in 100 years, the silence of centuries was broken not by voices, but by the inevitability of a power long forgotten, long feared, and now undeniable. The galaxy had assumed humans were gone. The galaxy had assumed it was safe. The galaxy was wrong. The galaxy had grown comfortable with its assumptions. Every species, every empire, every fleet believed that humanity was nothing more than a footnote in history, a cautionary tale of ambition that had burned too brightly, too fast. The Hax Dominion celebrated the consolidation of their mining clusters. The Alari Republic reveled in technological dominance. The Vorthan Imperium tightened its grasp on star systems with the arrogance of an empire that believed it faced no equal. Then, without warning, the first signs appeared. Sensors aboard the Obsidian Crown flared with irregular blips. The readings were subtle, At first, minute disturbances in subspace, minor fluctuations in energy grids, variations in gravimetric fields, but Kylira's instincts screamed at her that something extraordinary was happening. She scanned the displays, adjusting the focus on every anomaly. What she saw defied logic. Formations appearing and disappearing faster than any subspace theory could explain, vectors that curved impossibly, and energy signatures that suggested power beyond any known design. "It can't be," muttered Lieutenant Sora, the flagship's tactical officer, her voice trembling. "No species could maneuver like this. It's impossible." Kylira did not reply immediately. Her mind raced, tracing the anomalous signals across multiple star systems. Then the first vessel appeared. It was small, sleek, and almost elegant, unassuming at first glance, but unmistakably alive with energy. Sensors failed to detect its propulsion systems, yet it moved with precision, calculated and deliberate, as if it existed slightly out of phase with the rest of the universe. The Vorthans reacted predictably. Energy beams flared, missile salvos launched, and defensive protocols activated. But the human vessel had already vanished, leaving no trace. A heartbeat later, it reappeared behind the Vorthan dreadnought formation. With a single, calculated strike, the lead dreadnought's reactor erupted in a controlled implosion, consuming the vessel and scattering fragments across the void. Silence fell over the bridge. They are here," Kylira whispered. Her golden eyes widened as realization struck her like a hammer. "Humans, they have returned." Across the galaxy, similar events unfolded with terrifying efficiency. Fleets that had once been considered invincible, armed with the latest weapons of the Hrax, Alari, and Vorthan engineering, were systematically neutralized. Terran ships moved as if guided by a single mind, phasing in and out of detection, striking with surgical precision at critical nodes, weapon systems, and command structures. No formation could predict their actions. No sensor could track their movements. Each engagement was a demonstration not of brute force, but of intelligence and foresight so advanced it bordered on prescience. The first major engagement occurred near the Hrax Dominion's mining cluster Alpha 6. 3 dreadnoughts, accompanied by a dozen cruisers, advanced to intercept the Terran frigates. Energy beams streaked across the void, plasma volleys erupted, and missile barrages tore through the vacuum, yet the humans did not falter. They phased around attacks, redirected energy signatures, and exploited weaknesses in ways that no Hrax officer could anticipate. Within moments, the 3 dreadnoughts had been annihilated, their wreckage drifting silently among the stars. The cruisers followed shortly after, disabled by strikes to reactor cores and navigation systems that appeared invisible until the moment of impact. The galaxy fell silent. No empire had ever encountered a species capable of operating on such a level. For centuries, civilizations had measured power in terms of fleet size, armor, weapon output, and technological sophistication. Humanity had ignored all of these measures entirely. They did not rely on numbers, on firepower, or on conventional defenses. They relied on adaptability, intellect, and a relentless drive to survive and prevail. Kylira watched from the observation deck as another human vessel materialized near the Vorthan Armada. Her tactical team scrambled to calculate intercept vectors, but every plan was already obsolete. The frigate moved through the formation effortlessly, striking at the energy conduits and command bridges of capital ships with terrifying accuracy. Explosions ripped through the flagship of the Vorthan fleet, and entire squadrons were shredded before the sensors could relay the data. "They move like a single organism," muttered Lieutenant Sora. "It's as if they think in patterns we cannot see, predict, or counter. Kyira's pulse quickened. She had read the old Terran legend stories of humans surviving impossible odds, of turning weakness into advantage, but she had never believed them fully. Now, watching the fleet decimate ships that had once been the pride of empires, she realized the galaxy had underestimated humans not because they were weak, but because their strength did not conform to conventional understanding. The humans were not merely engaging the fleets, they were dismantling them. Entire formations fell apart in minutes. Systems that had been considered impregnable were destroyed with surgical precision, and every engagement left no survivors to analyze, no technology to recover, no warning of what had struck. It was not destruction for domination, it was destruction for control, executed with a terrifying clarity of purpose. Across the universe, planetary governors, admirals, and war councils paused in stunned silence. Reports flooded in from systems that had once laughed at the idea of human resurgence, entire battle groups obliterated without warning, subspace communication networks cut, orbital defenses annihilated. The silence that followed each strike was not emptiness. It was awe, disbelief, and the dawning terror of recognition. And then, for the first time, the humans transmitted not a fleet-wide declaration, not a signal of surrender or aggression, but a single pulse, clear and undeniable, reaching across subspace to every empire, every station, every surviving fleet. The message was simple, its meaning unmistakable. Humanity had returned. They had not returned for negotiation. They had not returned for warning. They had returned to reclaim the universe. On the bridge of the Obsidian Crown, Kyira turned to her tactical officers. Her voice, once commanding, now trembled with awe. They're not weak. They're beyond anything we've ever measured. Every assumption we've held about power, strategy, and survival, it's all wrong. Her gaze shifted to the view screen, where the nearest human vessel appeared with impossible precision, phasing effortlessly between fleets and annihilating entire squadrons in seconds. A human officer's projection appeared on the screen, calm, composed, almost serene, radiating authority beyond what any Vorthan could match. "We have returned," the figure said, voice steady. The galaxy assumed our absence meant weakness. It was wrong. The words resonated across the bridge, across the fleet, across the systems that had once believed themselves untouchable. For the first time in a century, the universe understood the truth. Humans were not merely back. Humans were unstoppable, and every empire that had taken their absence for granted had miscalculated beyond redemption. Kyira's mind raced. She understood, finally, that the galaxy's assumption of power had been fragile. Humanity's return was not a ripple. It was a wave, one that would sweep across every system, every fleet, every planet, leaving the arrogant and unprepared in ruins. The human fleet was more than force. It was a revelation. Their strength was subtle, unseen by those who measured it by conventional metrics, yet absolute, unyielding, and terrifying in its precision. And as the first Terran frigate struck again, dismantling a Vorthan cruiser with a single precise blast, Kyira whispered to herself, voice heavy with awe and dread, "The humans, they are here. The galaxy will never be the same." The silence that followed each engagement was deafening. The universe, for a fleeting moment, held its breath. Humanity had returned, and the rules of existence itself seemed to pause in recognition of what was coming. The universe had grown arrogant, Entire civilizations had built their empires on the assumption that humans were gone forever, their absence a void into which ambition could flow unchecked. But the arrival of the Terran fleet shattered that illusion with a precision that left the galaxy reeling. Across multiple star systems, the humans demonstrated a terrifying mastery of space and subspace that defied comprehension. Fleets that had once been considered invincible were decimated before they could even organize. The Hrak's dominion, with its disciplined dreadnought formations, had learned to rely on brute force and overwhelming numbers. Now, each of their assumptions was exposed as a vulnerability. Frigates slipped through gaps in formation, emerging from angles that should have been impossible. Energy beams were absorbed, redirected, or phased around. Missiles exploded harmlessly, as if the laws of physics themselves had been rewritten by unseen hands. Near the mining cluster known as Alpha 6, the first major confrontation took place. The Hraks had assembled a fleet of 3 dreadnoughts, 20 cruisers, and multiple escort frigates to intercept the emerging Terran vessels. Sensors flickered as the humans approached. The first dreadnought's targeting systems locked on, firing massive plasma cannons in coordinated volleys. It was meaningless. The Terran vessels phased in and out of existence, appearing behind the formation. Reactor cores overloaded, bridge sections incinerated, and entire cruisers were torn apart with precision that no weapon in the Hrak's arsenal could match. Every attack was deliberate, every maneuver perfectly timed. The Hrak's fleet dissolved like sand through fingers. Command structures were shattered, communications jammed. By the time the survivors realized what had happened, the fleet was nothing more than drifting wreckage, a testament to a force that had returned from legend. Even the Vorthans, known across the galaxy for their discipline and ferocity, were unprepared. Kylira's descendant watched from the obsidian crown as her best squadrons were annihilated with a terrifying efficiency that left her in disbelief. Plasma beams that could pierce the thickest armor were evaded effortlessly. Human vessels moved through formations, as if guided by a singular intelligence, striking with surgical precision at weak points, power nodes, and command centers. The Vorthan ships fought bravely, but courage could not overcome foresight and adaptability. Entire squadrons disappeared in seconds, leaving behind silence and stunned crews. Reports came from the Alari Republic ships that had been considered state-of-the-art were obliterated without warning. Orbital defense arrays that had been fortified over decades failed as humans phased through their shields and struck critical power conduits. Entire cities on planetary surfaces were evacuated, not because humans wished to destroy them, but because their presence in orbit was enough to render conventional defense meaningless. The Terran fleet moved with elegance and inevitability. Their ships did not merely engage, they anticipated. Calculations that would have taken supercomputers hours were executed in moments. Weaknesses, invisible to even the most advanced senses, were exploited. Where empires had relied on overwhelming force, humans relied on intellect, foresight, and the unshakable will to act decisively. They did not destroy for pride or revenge. They destroyed to assert dominance in a way that made every other civilization's power irrelevant. On the obsidian crown, Kylira's descendant could only watch in stunned silence. She had been trained for command, raised to lead fleets with precision, and taught the doctrines of warfare that had kept her people dominant for centuries. Yet here she was, powerless to stop a species that had been absent from the galaxy for 100 years. Every strategy she had learned was obsolete, Every calculation she had made crumbled under the elegance and unpredictability of human tactics. "They are flawless," whispered Lieutenant Sora, her voice trembling as she attempted to reroute defensive protocols. "It's as if they think 10 steps ahead of every move we could possibly make." Kylira's mind raced. The humans' return was not merely a military event. It was a revelation. All the assumptions of galactic power were being overturned. Fleet size, armor, weapons, and technology all were secondary to the qualities the humans displayed: ingenuity, adaptability, and unyielding will. They had returned, not as a lost species, but as a force whose capabilities the galaxy had forgotten, or perhaps had never truly understood. The humans' communication came next, a single pulse that spread across subspace, reaching every empire simultaneously. It was not a threat in the conventional sense. It carried no message of conquest, no demand for surrender. Instead, it resonated with certainty, with inevitability, with presence. The universe understood the message, even without deciphering it. Humanity had returned. And they had returned to claim their place, not in negotiation, not in diplomacy, but in dominance. Fleet after fleet fell. Worlds that had once been considered untouchable now lay in ruin, their orbital defenses destroyed before planetary shields could engage. Entire civilizations froze as human ships moved through space like phantoms, dismantling structures, neutralizing fleets, and leaving systems silent. The galaxy had believed it could predict the flow of war, the rise and fall of power, but humans had returned to prove that no prediction, no calculation, no assumption could account for their ingenuity. Kylira's descendant felt a cold clarity settle over her. Every empire that had relied on brute force, on conventional strategy, on predictable tactics, had been exposed as fragile. The galaxy had grown arrogant in humanity's absence. They had assumed safety. They had assumed superiority. They had assumed the universe belonged to them. And now, in the wake of the Terran fleet's emergence, the galaxy understood the price of underestimation. Every surviving commander, every leader, every ruler experienced the same realization simultaneously. Humans were not merely back, they were beyond the measures of power the galaxy had ever known. Intelligence, strategy, resilience, and adaptability had coalesced into a force so precise, so unstoppable, that the collapse of empires seemed inevitable. Kylira turned to her tactical officers, her voice steady despite the shock in her chest. They moved like thought, made flesh. Every assumption we've had about strength, about tactics, about survival, it is irrelevant. Humanity has returned, and we cannot stop them. Her words were carried across the ship's bridge, reaching every officer, every crew member. Silence followed a silence, heavy with comprehension. The universe, for a fleeting instant, seemed to hold its breath. And then the humans struck again. This time, near the outer rim of the Ilari Republic, 3 human frigates materialized in the void, invisible until the moment of attack. Defensive satellites and planetary weapons engaged automatically, but the humans phased through shields, bypassed point defenses, and struck critical energy nodes. In moments, the satellites collapsed, and the planetary capital's orbital defenses lay in ruins. Entire command centers were obliterated. Civilization, as it had been known, faltered under the precision of human calculation. The galaxy began to understand the true nature of the threat. It was not speed. It was not armor. It was not firepower. It was adaptation. It was the ability to predict, adjust, and execute with a clarity no other species could match. Humans had returned not merely as warriors, they had returned as a force beyond comprehension. And the silence that followed each strike was deafening, not because of emptiness, but because the galaxy had finally recognized what centuries of absence had obscured. Humanity had returned, and the universe was no longer theirs to dominate. The galaxy was no longer safe. Every empire that had grown confident in humanity's absence now faced a reality too immense to comprehend. It was not merely fleets that had returned, it was an entire way of thinking, a force whose strategies existed beyond conventional understanding. Humans moved as though the laws of physics themselves bent to their will, exploiting weaknesses invisible to any other species, reshaping battles before anyone could react. The Terran fleet had begun a systematic campaign, striking not merely at ships but at the very infrastructure of empires. Planetary defense grids were neutralized with pinpoint accuracy, the power conduits disabled, and communication networks disabled before anyone could organize resistance. On dozens of worlds, orbital installations simply stopped functioning, their automated defenses incapacitated as Terran vessels slipped past every barrier. It was not destruction for spectacle. It was precise, calculated dismantling of the galaxy's assumption of control. Kylira's descendant watched helplessly from the obsidian crown as another human strike group moved through the Vorthan-controlled sector. Dozens of capital ships, all considered state-of-the-art, had been neutralized in the first engagement. Now, smaller squadrons, frigates, destroyers, tactical support vessels were systematically eliminating every remaining force in the sector. The humans adapted to every move instantly, countering attacks before they were fully launched, predicting strategies before they could be conceived. "Every calculation is wrong," whispered Lieutenant Sora. Her fingers flew across the control console, attempting to reroute shields and reposition squadrons. "Every prediction, every vector, they move faster than thought. Faster than any computer can simulate. Faster than we can even perceive." Kylira's mind raced, tracing the patterns of the Terran fleet. It was not random movement. It was choreography at a scale and precision no Vorthan mind had ever encountered. Ships slipped through gaps no one knew existed, struck vulnerabilities invisible to conventional sensors, and adapted to every engagement in real time. It was strategy made flesh, intelligence incarnate, a demonstration that survival and dominance were not matters of brute force, but of ingenuity, adaptability, and unshakable will. On one world, the Alari Republic had attempted to mount a planetary defense. Dozens of orbital satellites, hundreds of surface-to-space weapons, and fleets in orbit engaged the incoming Terran ships. The humans did not fight conventionally. They phased in and out, reappeared behind defensive lines, and struck at the reactors of orbital stations with precision that made the Alari gasp. Satellites exploded in controlled implosions. Capital ships suffered critical damage before their crews could comprehend what had occurred. In minutes, the planet's defenses were neutralized. Human frigates slipped into orbit, deploying drones to stabilize collapsed infrastructure, repairing what they had not destroyed, demonstrating a level of control that no other species had ever achieved. Even the Hrax Dominion, whose fleets had once terrorized entire sectors, were forced into retreat. Their most seasoned admirals could only watch as human strategy dismantled decades of planning. Every engagement they attempted was countered before it could begin. Their forces were annihilated not by numbers, but by the humans' ability to manipulate space, timing, and enemy expectations with absolute mastery. Communication across the galaxy became a chorus of disbelief. Star systems fell silent as command structures collapsed, fleets disappeared, and governments struggled to comprehend the scale of the human return. Every attempt to organize resistance ended in futility. Human ships appeared in impossible positions, striking where it was least expected, then vanishing before retaliation could occur. The Terrans did not merely fight, they rewrote the rules of engagement. On the Obsidian Crown, Kylira's descendant observed the human commander's projection, calm, measured, exuding authority beyond what any Vorthan could contest. He did not shout, did not issue threats, and yet his presence demanded obedience. His voice, projected across subspace, resonated with certainty. "We have returned. Your assumptions were fragile. Your empires were unprepared. The universe is no longer yours to command." It was a statement, not a threat. And in that statement, the galaxy understood the inevitability of the human's power. Kylira's hands gripped the console tightly. Her people had fought wars for centuries, confident in the superiority of their fleets, the perfection of their tactics, the discipline of their warriors. And yet, here they were, helpless. The humans had returned, not with a desire for annihilation alone, but with the mastery to dismantle entire empires, to reassert control over a galaxy that had believed itself safe. The humans' methods were elegant. They adapted to environmental hazards, asteroid belts, gravity wells, subspace turbulence, not as obstacles, but as tools. Energy beams were redirected against enemy infrastructure. Fleets were herded into natural choke points, only to be destroyed with minimal effort. Planetary defenses were manipulated. Enemy AI systems hacked or neutralized, all without a single human vessel suffering serious damage. It was a demonstration of skill, adaptability, and foresight at a level the galaxy had never before witnessed. And the survivors understood the unthinkable. No strategy could anticipate humans. No defense could hold against them. No prediction could outmaneuver their adaptability. They were not merely a species returning. They were an event, a force of nature that the galaxy had long forgotten, underestimated, and feared to imagine. In the midst of this chaos, Kylira realized the horrifying truth. The galaxy had built its assumptions on fragility. Every empire, every fleet, every leader had taken human absence for granted. They had assumed safety, superiority, and permanence. Humanity's return obliterated those assumptions in a wave of precision strikes, each more devastating than the last. The silence following each Terran attack was deafening. It was the silence of realization, of awe, and of fear, the recognition that the galaxy had misjudged the apex of power. Humanity was not merely back. It was an unstoppable force, reshaping space, strategy, and survival itself. And as the human fleet moved on, disappearing into the void to strike the next system, Kylira whispered to herself, her voice trembling with dread and awe, "The galaxy will never recover. They are unstoppable." The universe, for the first time in centuries, fell into a silence that was more than quiet, it was comprehension. Humanity had returned, and every species understood that nothing would ever be the same. The galaxy's arrogance had been shattered. Every civilization that had believed humanity was extinct now faced an undeniable truth. Humans had returned, and nothing would ever be the same. Ships that had once been symbols of pride, dreadnoughts that could annihilate planets, fleets that could devastate entire sectors, all lay in ruins or drifted silently in space, the remnants of a miscalculation that could never be undone. On the bridge of the Obsidian Crown, Princess Kailira's descendant stood frozen, watching the unfolding devastation. The human fleet moved through the Vorthan-controlled sector with calm inevitability, not just striking at fleets, but reshaping the battlefield itself. Entire star systems fell silent as Terran ships phased past orbital defenses, dismantled military satellites, and disabled planetary communication arrays. Every countermeasure employed by the Vorthans, every last defensive tactic, had been anticipated, neutralized, or turned against them. The human commander's projection appeared on the bridge once more. He was calm, composed, radiating an authority that needed no weapons, no fleets to enforce. His voice echoed across the command bridge, through subspace, and into every consciousness attuned to the frequencies of power. We have returned. Your absence of vigilance allowed arrogance to flourish. Your assumptions were fragile. The universe is no longer yours to command. Kailira's mind raced. Every fleet she had trained, every strategy she had honed, every doctrine her people had followed, all were meaningless against this force. The humans had returned, not as a scattered species, but as a force beyond comprehension, intelligent, adaptive, relentless, and unstoppable. Every attack she attempted was countered before it could begin. Every defensive system she activated was anticipated and rendered obsolete. It was not firepower or size that made the humans dominant. It was will, ingenuity, and the relentless pursuit of survival and supremacy. Across the galaxy, the same realization was occurring. The Hrax Dominion had lost its command fleet. The Alari Republic's capital worlds were silent, their orbital defense arrays destroyed before they could engage. Entire planetary civilizations had ceased transmissions, not because of immediate annihilation, but because humans had neutralized every system that enabled resistance. No one could oppose them. No one could anticipate them. No one could survive them. In the aftermath of the strikes, the galaxy became eerily still. Systems once humming with communication, fleets once moving with disciplined precision, empires once confident in their dominance, all paused, as though the universe itself held its breath. The silence was not emptiness. It was recognition, a collective acknowledgement that a force had returned that could not be opposed, predicted, or comprehended. Kailira looked at the human projection again. He did not smile, did not boast, but his presence conveyed centuries of survival, of learning, of enduring against impossible odds. He was the embodiment of everything humanity had been: adaptable, ingenious, fearless, unyielding. And in that presence, the galaxy understood the truth. This was not merely a military campaign. This was a reclamation, a demonstration of power built on resilience, intellect, and the will to endure where others faltered. She turned to her officers. "Do you see it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Every system, every fleet, every defense we relied on, it's irrelevant. Humans do not fight by the rules we know. They redefine them." Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Sora, nodded silently. "We cannot calculate them. We cannot predict them. We cannot survive them, not with our current understanding of space, weapons, or strategy. They are perfection incarnate." And they were. The human fleet advanced methodically, systematically dismantling every remaining bastion of power. Star systems were reclaimed not merely through force, but through precise, intelligent engagement. Ships moved in patterns that mimicked thought itself, anticipating and countering every move of their opponents. Defense grids, command centers, orbital platforms all fell under the relentless precision of Terran strategy. Every empire that had once laughed at humanity's absence now understood their folly. In one sector, a Vorthon flagship attempted a last stand. Hundreds of capital ships and squadrons concentrated their firepower on the approaching Terran vessels, aiming to crush them before they could reach the planet below. The humans responded not with a frontal assault, but with subtle manipulation of subspace. Ships phased in and out, redirecting attacks, exploiting weak points, striking critical power conduits. Within moments, the flagship's reactor cores were destabilized, entire squadrons vaporized, and the planet's defenses lay in ruins. The message was clear. Humans had returned, and they did not operate on the assumptions of conventional warfare. They were beyond prediction. They were beyond opposition. They were the apex of survival, strategy, and power. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy truly fell silent. Not because fleets were destroyed, not because worlds lay in ruin, but because every civilization comprehended what had returned. Humanity. The silence was absolute, and in it, the truth resonated across star systems, across empires, across every corner of the known universe. Humans were unstoppable. The galaxy's assumptions of power, strength, and dominance were meaningless. The apex of civilization had returned, and the universe would never again be the same. Kyra lowered her gaze, her hands shaking on the control console. She realized that survival was no longer a matter of weapons or fleets. It was a matter of understanding the incomprehensible. Humanity had not returned for negotiation, for diplomacy, or even for revenge. They had returned because they were inexorable, because their presence demanded recognition, and because the universe itself had always belonged to those willing to endure, adapt, and persist. And in that realization, the universe fell completely silent. No communication, no fleet maneuver, no empire dared respond. The humans did not need to fire another shot to command absolute authority. Every civilization understood the final truth. They had returned, and nothing, not fleets, not weapons, not strategy, could challenge their will. The galaxy had assumed humans were gone. The galaxy had assumed it was safe. The galaxy was wrong. For the first time in countless millennia, the universe recognized that true power was not measured in numbers, in armor, or in firepower. It was measured in resilience, intellect, adaptability, and the indomitable will to endure against all odds. Humans had returned, and the universe, in that instant, fell silent.